16 million people died in the First World War. Most people today cannot name 3. Not the generals, not the politicians, the soldiers, the stretcher bearers, the pilots, the ones who stood in the mud, who breathed the gas, who ran toward machine guns instead of away from them. One was shot in the face. He lost an eye. He lost a hand. He survived 2 plane crashes. He escaped a prison camp by digging with one arm. When doctors told him he was finished, he said he was just getting started. Another carried wounded soldiers across open ground with nothing but a donkey between him and gunfire. Another disguised herself as a man so she could fight and became one of the most decorated soldiers of the entire war. Another believed words could wound just as deeply as artillery. They were not myths. They were not propaganda. They were people. And when the war ended, history chose only a few names to keep. The rest faded. Now we pull some of them back out of the dark. Adrian Paul Ghislain Carton de Wiart, born 5th of May, 1880. Brussels, Belgium. British Army. Adrian Carton de Wiart was born in Brussels in 1880. His father was a wealthy Belgian businessman with international interests. His mother was Irish, from a well-connected Catholic family. This matters. He did not grow up poor. He grew up privileged. After his mother died when he was young, his father moved the family to England. Business, education, opportunity. Adrian was sent to Roman Catholic boarding schools. Eventually, he enrolled at Balliol College, Oxford. He was not meant to be a soldier. He was meant to inherit influence. Then, in 1899, the Second Boer War broke out in South Africa. He was 19. He lied about his age. Left Oxford without permission and enlisted in the British Army under a false name. Not because he needed money, because he wanted war. He later admitted that peace felt dull to him. War did not. He was wounded in the Boer War, shot in the stomach and groin. He survived, and when the First World War began in 1914, he volunteered again, this time as an officer. On the Western Front, in the early months of trench warfare, a bullet tore through his face. It destroyed his left eye. Surgeons removed it. He was fitted with a glass eye. He removed it himself, replaced it with a black patch, and returned to command. He was transferred to East Africa in 1915, fighting German colonial forces in brutal jungle conditions. There, shrapnel shattered his left hand. Doctors tried to save it. Infection spread. He grew impatient. He reportedly tore off the damaged fingers himself before surgeons completed the amputation. One eye, one hand, still commanding. Then came the Somme in 1916. One of the bloodiest battles in human history. He led British forces under relentless machine gun fire and artillery bombardment. He was shot multiple times again in the skull, hip, leg, ankle. He refused evacuation. He continued issuing orders. For his leadership under fire, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military decoration. Then came captivity. In 1917, while commanding a mission in Italy, he was captured by German forces after his aircraft was forced down behind enemy lines. He was taken to a prisoner of war camp in Austria. This is where the tunnel begins, not as a legend, as necessity. He was held at Schloss Colditz, a high-security camp for high-risk Allied officers. Colditz was designed to prevent escape. That made it irresistible. Despite having only one functional hand, Carton de Wiart joined escape planning. He participated in tunnel digging operations. They were discovered. He attempted escape again. Disguises, timing, misdirection. He made it beyond the perimeter once. He was recaptured before reaching safe territory. He did not stop trying. Eventually, after multiple attempts and mounting frustration from his captors, he was transferred under parole conditions and later repatriated in 1918 due to prisoner exchanges. Most men, after losing an eye, a hand, and surviving that scale of combat, would have retired. He did not. Between the wars, he served in Poland during the Polish-Soviet War in 1919. He was briefly imprisoned by Lithuanian forces, escaped again, then returned to Britain. When the Second World War began, he was 60. Too old for frontline command. He volunteered anyway. Churchill sent him as Britain's military representative to Poland in 1939. While travelling by sea in 1941, his ship was torpedoed in the Mediterranean. He survived, was captured by Italian forces, interned in a prisoner of war camp near Florence. He attempted escape again. Eventually, he was released after the Italian government negotiated prisoner exchanges. He was later sent to China as Churchill's personal representative to Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. His task was diplomatic, coordinating Allied interests in Asia. He was not chasing war for adrenaline. He was still serving. He retired after the war to County Cork, Ireland, bought a quiet house overlooking the Atlantic, married, raised a family, and finally lived in peace. He wrote his memoir there. Its title was simple: Happy Odyssey. He died in 1963, in his bed, at 83. After surviving 2 world wars, captivity, crashes, amputations, gunfire, and decades of violence. In that memoir, he wrote a line that still unsettles readers. Frankly, I enjoyed the war. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't bloodlust. It was clarity. War simplified the world into decisions. Advance. Hold. Survive. For a man who seemed impossible to break, that clarity made sense. 16 million died in the First World War. most of their names vanished into numbers. But some men refused to disappear. And not all courage in that war came from charging machine guns. Some of it walked slowly, under shell fire, leading mules through the mud.
John Simpson Kirkpatrick, born 6th July 1892, South Shields, England, Australian Imperial Force.
John Simpson Kirkpatrick was not born into privilege. He was born in 1892 in South Shields, England. Industrial northeast, shipyards, coal smoke, hard winters. His father worked in shipping. His mother died when he was young. He grew up working. Sailor, labourer, restless. By 1910, he had jumped ship in Australia. That's how he arrived. Not as a patriot, not as a soldier, as a stowaway. He wandered through Western Australia doing odd jobs. Cane cutting, railway work, shearing. When war broke out in 1914, Australia was still young, only 13 years of federation. There was a rush to enlist. Adventure, loyalty to empire, escape from poverty. Simpson signed up under a false name. Not Kirkpatrick, just John Simpson. Why? Because he had deserted from previous naval service and didn't want that discovered. He joined the 3rd Field Ambulance of the Australian Imperial Force. Not infantry, not a rifleman, a stretcher bearer. In April 1915, he landed at Gallipoli, and Gallipoli was chaos. Cliffs rising straight out of the sea. Turkish machine gun nests above. Men pinned down on narrow strips of beach, the wounded piled up within hours. There were almost no roads, no safe routes. Carrying wounded men by stretcher or up steep. Exposed ridges meant certain death. Then Simpson found a donkey. Accounts differ slightly on how. Some say he found it wandering near the beach, others say he commandeered it from a supply unit. Either way, he tied makeshift panniers to its sides and began walking. Alone. Up and down the exposed gullies. From the firing line to the beach hospitals, under constant sniper fire. Turkish sharpshooters had clear sight lines into the ravines. Simpson walked anyway. No weapon, no escort, just a donkey and wounded men draped across its back. He did this for 24 days. Every day, multiple trips. Through what soldiers later called Shrapnel Valley. Bullets cracked past him. Shell fragments tore into rock around him. He kept walking. The donkey became as famous as the man. Some called it Duffy, others Murphy. There were probably several donkeys over the weeks, but in legend, it became one. A steady animal moving through smoke and dust. Simpson would walk beside it, holding the bridle with one hand and steadying the wounded with the other. Other stretcher bearers later admitted something uncomfortable. They tried to imitate him. Many were shot. He kept surviving until May 19th, 1915. A sniper bullet hit him through the heart. He was 22 years old. The donkey survived. The wounded man on its back survived. Simpson did not. He was buried on the slopes above Anzac Cove, his grave marked with a simple wooden cross. No Victoria Cross. No high command. No grand strategy. Just a man who decided, repeatedly, to walk into gunfire for strangers. His commanding officers recommended him for the Victoria Cross several times. It was denied. Some historians argue it was because he was technically a deserter under an alias. Others say paperwork failed. Either way, the award never came. But something else did. Memory. In Australia, he became a symbol. Not of aggression, not of conquest, but of mateship, of service without spectacle, of courage that does not need to shout. Statues were built, schools named after him. His image, a slouch-hatted soldier leading a donkey, became one of the most enduring images of the First World War in Australia. And here is the contrast with Carton de Wiart. One sought war, the other did not. One seemed to thrive in chaos. The other endured it quietly. Both walked into danger, but for different reasons. 16 million died in that war. Most of them are names carved into stone. Simpson's name survived, not because he killed, because he carried. And in a war defined by slaughter, that distinction matters.
Gabriele D'Annunzio, nato 12 marzo 1863, Pescara, Abruzzo, Italia, militare italiana.
The poet who weaponized glory. Before he was a soldier, he was already dangerous. Gabriele D'Annunzio was born in 1863 in Pescara, in the newly unified Kingdom of Italy. He was not poor. He was not obscure. His father was wealthy enough to send him to elite schools. And D'Annunzio understood early that fame itself was a weapon. By his 20s, he had published poetry that scandalized and captivated Italy. He wrote about passion, violence, sensuality, national destiny. He cultivated image deliberately. He dressed theatrically, lived extravagantly, had high-profile affairs. He wasn't just a poet. He was Italy's first modern celebrity intellectual. Newspapers followed him. Crowds gathered for readings. He knew how to command a room before he ever commanded men. And when World War I erupted in 1914, Italy hesitated. Italy was technically allied to Germany and Austria-Hungary, but D'Annunzio wanted war against Austria. He toured Italy, giving fiery speeches, from balconies, from theatre stages, from city squares. He framed war not as strategy, but as destiny. He called it a chance for Italy to complete its national story. The pressure from nationalist crowds became intense. In May 1915, Italy entered the war against Austria-Hungary. D'Annunzio had not acted alone, but his voice amplified the movement. He made war feel romantic. Then he insisted on fighting it himself. He joined the army in his 50s. Too old for infantry, he became an aviator. He flew reconnaissance missions, bombing raids, propaganda missions. In 1916, he was nearly killed in a crash. He lost the use of one eye. He returned to flying anyway. In 1918, he led the famous Flight over Vienna. 9 Italian planes flew 700 miles over enemy territory, not to bomb, to drop leaflets, written by D'Annunzio himself, mocking the Austro-Hungarian Empire, encouraging surrender. It was psychological warfare, spectacle, theatre in the sky. But the war ended badly for Italy. The Treaty of Versailles did not give Italy all the territories it had been promised. Nationalists called it a mutilated victory. And this is where D'Annunzio crossed from poet to insurgent. In September 1919, he led 2,000 armed volunteers into Fiume. Today, that city is Rijeka, in Croatia. At the time, it was disputed territory, part of the collapsing Austro-Hungarian Empire. Both Italy and the new kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes claimed it. The Italian government hesitated. D'Annunzio did not. He marched in and declared it Italian, without orders, without authority. He ruled it for 15 months. He wrote a constitution. He introduced mass rallies, uniformed followers, Roman salutes, balcony speeches, choreographed public rituals, black-shirted militias. The world watched. A young Benito Mussolini watched very carefully. Mussolini visited Fiume. He saw the pageantry, the symbolism, the emotional manipulation. He saw how theatre could control crowds. D'Annunzio was not fascism, but he was its prototype. When Mussolini later rose to power in 1922, he copied D'Annunzio's staging, copied the balcony, copied the mythic language, copied the mass choreography. D'Annunzio never fully joined Mussolini's regime. He admired strength, but he distrusted Mussolini personally. Mussolini understood the danger of D'Annunzio's popularity, so he neutralized him, gave him titles, money, a palace on Lake Garda, Il Vittoriale, a monument house filled with relics, war trophies, aircraft mounted in gardens, naval guns on terraces, a shrine to himself. He retired there, not in disgrace, but contained. He died in 1938, before Italy entered World War II. Some historians believe Mussolini preferred him quiet, a legend living in a museum. Rather than a rival on a balcony, he never saw the full horror fascism would unleash, but the architecture of its spectacle bore his fingerprints. And here is the uncomfortable truth. He did not build the regime. He did not command the armies. But he taught a nation how to feel about power. And sometimes, the man who writes the script is more dangerous than the man who steps onto the stage.
Milunka Savić, 28. jun 1892, Koprivnica, Srbija, Vojska Srbije.
The Serbian army did not know she was a woman when she enlisted. In 1913, a thin teenager named Milunka Savić cut her hair, wrapped her chest, took her brother's name, and reported for duty. She did not do it for glory. She did it because her brother had been called up, and she refused to let him go alone. So she went in his place. For months, she fought as a man. In the Balkan Wars first, then in the Great War. No one suspected anything because she was good. She learned to throw grenades with precision. She moved through trenches with the same discipline as any other soldier. She endured cold, mud, hunger, and she did not break. It wasn't until she was wounded, hit by shrapnel in 1915, that doctors discovered the truth. She was female. The Serbian command summoned her. They offered her a transfer. Nursing, support roles. Something appropriate. She refused. She asked to stay in combat. And astonishingly, they let her. From that point on, she fought openly as herself. And what followed was extraordinary. At the Battle of Kolubara, she single-handedly captured 23 Bulgarian soldiers. Not by accident, not by luck, by charging their position alone with grenades. She was awarded the Karađorđe's Star with Swords, Serbia's highest military decoration. Then she was wounded again, and again, and again. By the end of the war, she had been wounded at least 9 times. She received decorations from Serbia, from France, from Russia, from Britain. The French awarded her the Légion d'honneur. Twice. She is considered the most decorated female combatant in modern military history. And yet, outside Serbia, almost no one knows her name. After the war, she was offered a comfortable life in France. She declined. She returned home. She adopted 3 orphaned girls. She worked as a cleaner, a seamstress, a quiet civilian. When the Second World War came, she was arrested by occupying forces and sent to a concentration camp. She survived that too. After the war, Yugoslavia barely acknowledged her. For decades, she lived in poverty. The state that had once celebrated her had forgotten her. She died in 1973. Buried quietly. No global headlines. no statues in foreign capitals. But her story remains one of the most remarkable in the entire war. A woman who stepped into a trench under a false name, was exposed, refused to leave, and became one of the most decorated soldiers of the First World War. Not because she asked to be remembered, but because she refused to stand aside.
William Henry Johnson, born 15th July 1892, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, USA, United States Army.
Henry Johnson was born in 1892 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He grew up poor. When he was still a child, his family moved north to Albany, New York, part of the early wave of African American families leaving the South in search of work and dignity. He left school young, worked as a railway porter, carried luggage for white passengers, smiled when required, stayed quiet when expected. When America entered the war in 1917, he enlisted immediately. Not because the country treated him as an equal, it did not, but because the uniform offered something rare, respect, or at least the possibility of it. He joined the 369th Infantry Regiment, an all-African American unit, segregated from white American divisions, under-equipped, often denied proper training. Many American officers did not trust African American soldiers in frontline combat, so the 369th was sent to fight under French command instead. The French did not care about American racial hierarchies. They cared about who would stand and who would run. Henry Johnson stood. On May 14th, 1918, in the Argonne Forest, Johnson and fellow soldier Needham Roberts were assigned to guard a forward listening post. It was dark. The forest was silent. Then the grenades began. A German raiding party, at least 20 men, advanced on their position. Roberts was wounded early. Johnson was hit almost immediately. Still, he stayed upright. He threw grenades back into the trees. When they ran out, he fired his rifle. When it jammed, he used it as a club. When the stock splintered, he drew his bolo knife. The fight closed in. At one point, German soldiers tried to drag Roberts away as a prisoner. Johnson charged them alone. He stabbed one, then another. He kept fighting despite more than 20 wounds. Gunshot, shrapnel, blade. By dawn, the German raiding party had retreated. Roberts was alive. The line had not broken. The French were the first to recognize what had happened. They awarded Johnson the Croix de Guerre with a gold palm, one of France's highest decorations for valor. He became the first American soldier in the war to receive it. But when he returned home, the reception was brief. There were parades, newspaper headlines, then silence. He struggled to find stable work. His injuries left him in chronic pain. The U.S. Army did not grant him full disability benefits. He was not invited to speak widely. He was not elevated into national memory. He died in 1929, 32 years old. Poor, largely forgotten. It would take nearly 100 years for the United States to formally correct that omission. In 2015, Henry Johnson was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. A century late. He had held the line alone in a forest, fought with rifle, club, and knife, saved a fellow soldier, saved his position, and for decades, history barely spoke his name. The Germans called him Black Death, but what he was that night was simpler than legend. He was the reason the line did not break.
Manfred Albrecht von Richthofen, geboren am 2. Mai 1892. Kleinburg, Deutschland, Deutsches Reich.
Manfred Albrecht Freiherr von Richthofen was born in 1892 in Breslau, in the Kingdom of Prussia. Today the city is called Wrocław, in Poland. He was born into minor nobility, hunting estates, military tradition, discipline from childhood. His father had been a cavalry officer. His uncles were soldiers. From the beginning, war was not an idea in the abstract. It was expectation. He attended cadet school at 11, learned to ride before he learned to question, learned to shoot before he learned to doubt. When the war began in 1914, he joined the German cavalry. But cavalry had no place in industrial warfare. Machine guns shredded horses. Artillery erased formations. So he transferred, not to escape danger, but to find relevance. He joined the air service. At first, he was not a pilot. He was an observer, sitting behind another man, mapping enemy positions, watching the lines shift below. Up there, he saw something different. The war looked smaller, cleaner, controllable. Then he met Oswald Bulcker, Germany's first great air tactician. Bulcker did not teach recklessness. He taught geometry. Attack from above. Never fight without advantage. Strike once. Strike clean. Richthofen listened. In January 1917, after scoring several victories and earning his first decorations, he made a decision. He painted his aircraft red. Not at the beginning of the war. Not as a young pilot trying to be seen. He painted it red after he had already proven himself. Some say it was to identify his squadron. Some say it was arrogance. Some say it was psychological warfare. But what mattered is this. When enemy pilots saw red in the sky, they knew exactly who it was. The colour became reputation. By mid-1917, he had become Germany's most celebrated flying ace. The newspapers named him Der Rote Baron, the Red Baron. He kept meticulous records. Every victory logged. Every engagement noted. He did not spray bullets wildly. He positioned himself above his opponent, behind the sun, close enough to ensure the shot would count. He would eventually be credited with 80 confirmed aerial victories. 80. And yet, one of the most decisive moments of his life came not from victory, but from a wound. In July 1917, he was struck in the head by a British bullet during combat. The round fractured his skull. He lost control of his aircraft, nearly blacked out in the air. He somehow landed. He was ordered to rest. He returned to flying within weeks. Friends noticed something had changed. Headaches, slower reflexes, moments of fatigue. But the war did not pause for recovery, and neither did he. By 1918, air combat had evolved. Aircraft were faster, more heavily armed, less forgiving. On April 21st, 1918, he chased a young Canadian pilot too low over Allied lines. He broke one of Balker's cardinal rules: never pursue deep into enemy territory. As he flew low over the Somme, he came under fire. From the air, from the ground. A single bullet entered near his right side and passed through his chest. His red triplane drifted, descended, then landed roughly in a field. Australian soldiers reached him first. He was still alive. For a moment. He died at 25 years old. The Allies buried him with full military honours. Even his enemies saluted him. That is not myth. That happened, and perhaps that is the strangest part of his story. He represented something the war itself did not. Precision in chaos. Individual skill in mechanized slaughter. A knight inside a machine. He made industrial killing look almost ceremonial. And that illusion mattered, because down below, the trenches were swallowing men without names. But up above, one red aircraft gave the war a face. And that face still stares back at us from old photographs. A young man in silk scarf and goggles, who believed the sky was cleaner than the earth, and who learned, too late, that modern war reaches everywhere, even the clouds.
Francis Pegahmagabow, born 9th March, 1891, Parry Sound, Ontario, Canada, Canada Expeditionary Force.
Francis Pegahmagabow was born in 1891 on the Parry Island Reserve in Ontario, Canada. He was Ojibwe, an Anishinaabe boy raised in a community that had already learned what it meant to be pushed aside by a growing empire. His mother died when he was young. He was raised by relatives in a culture where survival meant listening carefully to the forest, to movement, to silence. When war broke out in 1914, he enlisted almost immediately, not because Canada treated Indigenous men as equals. It did not. Indigenous soldiers could volunteer, but they could not vote. They could fight for a country that did not grant them full rights. Pegahmagabow joined anyway. He became a scout and a sniper in the 1st Canadian Infantry Battalion. In the trenches of France and Belgium, those roles required something rare: patience, stillness, the ability to remain unseen while watching everything. Pegahmagabow possessed it naturally. He moved through mud and wire in the dark, gathering intelligence on German positions. He slipped beyond the line when others would not. He crawled into no man's land to retrieve information and sometimes wounded men. As a sniper, he became one of the most effective in the entire Canadian Corps. He was credited with over 300 confirmed kills. 300. That number alone would make him one of the most lethal snipers of the First World War. But there was more. He also captured approximately 300 enemy soldiers. Alive. Not by charging recklessly, but by precision, by nerve, by control. At the Battle of Passchendaele, one of the muddiest, most punishing campaigns of the war, Pegahmagabow repeatedly carried messages through artillery barrages when telephone lines were destroyed. Each time he volunteered, he risked being erased by shellfire. Each time he returned, he was awarded the military medal, and then a bar to it, and then another bar. 3 military medals in total. Very few soldiers received that distinction. Yet after the war ended in 1918, when he returned home to Perry Island, he did not return to parades and public acclaim. He returned to the same discrimination that had existed before he left. He struggled to find stable work. He fought bureaucratic battles for indigenous rights. He later became chief of his community and an advocate for his people. He spoke out against the government that had decorated him. He demanded treaty rights be honored. The country he had fought for did not easily honor him in return. He died in 1952, quietly. For decades, his name was barely mentioned in national memory. No monuments in major cities, no films, no mythology. Yet historians now recognize him as one of the most effective indigenous soldiers in Canadian history. 300 confirmed kills, 3 military medals, and a life spent fighting both abroad and at home. If the Red Baron represented the myth of the night in the sky, Pegahmagabow represented something harder. A man who fought in a war that was not fully his, for a nation that did not fully see him, and who survived the trenches, only to confront another battlefield when he came home. His story does not end in legend. It ends in endurance, and that may be the greater form of heroism.
Alvin York, born 13th December, 1887, Fentress County, Tennessee, USA, United States Army.
He was born in a log cabin in the mountains of Tennessee, not in a capital city, not in a military academy. In the hills of Fentress County, in 1887, Alvin York grew up poor. His father was a blacksmith and farmer. His mother raised 11 children. There was no electricity, no formal education beyond the basics, no path to fame. He hunted to feed his family. He could shoot better than most men could speak. But that skill meant nothing to him. In his 20s, York became deeply religious. He joined the Church of Christ in Christian Union. He stopped drinking, stopped fighting, stopped gambling. He believed violence was a sin. When the United States entered the war in 1917, York did not celebrate. He filled out his draft paperwork and wrote a single word: conscientious. He believed killing violated God's commandment. His local draft board rejected the exemption. He appealed. He prayed. He fasted. He read scripture again and again. Then his pastor told him something that changed everything. Sometimes war is not chosen by the soldier. Sometimes it is forced upon him. And sometimes protecting others is not murder. It is duty. York wrestled with that idea. For months, he did not want to kill, but he did not want to abandon his country either. In October 1918, in the Argonne forest in France, the argument ended. York's unit was ordered to silence German machine guns cutting down American troops. 17 men moved forward. Within minutes, most were dead or wounded. York was one of the few still standing. The machine guns were still firing. He later said he prayed before he acted. Then he did what he had always done as a boy in the hills of Tennessee. He aimed carefully. He shot deliberately. He moved methodically. He picked off gunners one by one. When German soldiers charged him with bayonets, he shot the last man first. Then the second. Then the third. By the time the smoke cleared, 25 enemy soldiers lay dead, and 132 more surrendered to him. One man, one rifle, one moment that would follow him forever. York did not celebrate. He later said he felt no triumph, only a strange quiet. He had done what he believed God allowed him to do. But the weight of it stayed with him. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was paraded through New York City. Crowds cheered. Reporters called him a hero. But he returned to Tennessee as quickly as he could. He refused most endorsements. He refused to profit from the war. He built a school for poor children instead. He struggled privately with what he had done. The man who did not want to kill became one of the most lethal soldiers of the war. And the world called him a legend. He died in 1964. Not on a battlefield, not in glory. In Nashville, Tennessee. Quietly. But here is the part that unsettles the story. Alvin York never stopped questioning that day in the forest. He believed he had done his duty. He also believed he had taken lives. Both things were true, and that tension never left him. 16 million people died in the First World War. Millions more were wounded. Yet most of us cannot name even 5 of them. We remember the war, but not the faces, not the doubts, not the prayers whispered before the trigger was pulled. York's story survives because it fits our idea of heroism. But how many others stood in that forest with the same fear, the same faith, the same conflict, and were forgotten? The First World War ended in silence. No music, no victory parade for the men in the trenches. Just mud drying on uniforms and letters that stopped coming home. 16 million dead. 20 million wounded. Empires collapsed. Borders redrawn. And yet, when we speak of it now, we reduce it to a handful of names. A war remembered. But the people inside it, blurred. Adrian Carton de Wiart survived being shot through the face, losing an eye, losing a hand, plane crashes, prison camps, 2 wars. Milunka Savić hid her identity to fight, then became the most decorated woman in the history of warfare. Henry Johnson fought off an entire German raiding party with a rifle and a knife while wounded, and returned home to poverty. Francis Pegahmagabow crawled through no man's land again and again, invisible in the dark, defending a country that barely acknowledged his people. Alvin York wrestled with God before pulling the trigger and carried that weight long after the medals were pinned to his chest. These are not legends carved in marble. They were farmers, teachers, hunters, poets, young men and women who stepped forward into something larger than themselves. History did not forget them because they were insignificant. History forgot them because it is selective. It remembers symbols. It forgets individuals. It remembers flags. It forgets faces. And yet, every war is fought by individuals. By someone breathing in cold air. By someone whose hands are shaking. By someone who does not know if they will see morning. That is the part that disappears first. Not the battles. Not the dates. The human weight. If you strip away the uniforms, the medals, the myth, you are left with this. Ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances and forced to decide who they are. Some broke. Some survived. Some became stories whispered in towns that no longer speak their names. The First World War was called the War to End All Wars. It did not end war, but it did reveal something about courage. Not the loud kind, not the cinematic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that acts without knowing it will be remembered. The kind that stands in mud and smoke and does not run. We remember the war, but the war was never the story. The story was always the people, and most of them were almost erased.